two games couldn't be more different, but at the same time share a lot of things that are similar in them. I am of course talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! And Flesh and Blood. And I really want to make the statement at first that I really think Flesh and Blood and Yu-Gi-Oh!, though they are sharing some similarities, they are indeed run by two very different companies. And that is also something that attracted me to Flesh and Blood and drawn me away from Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think these two cards represent this kind of mindset, let's say it like that, that some of these companies have, but these two in particular just represent these for me. They are pretty similar in artwork and to some degree even in effect, I think, when you compare the two games. But the naming of Komani isn't really new, right? So I think this card is really representing that well. And LSS always tries to give back to the community, get feedback instantly, and also hear about the feedback from the community. So they rather want to have a give and take. So I really want to talk in this video about that. If you're new to the channel, my name is Alex. Welcome to the Fabled Academy. I really love Yu-Gi-Oh! I have to say. I am not making this video to bash on Yu-Gi-Oh! I played this game for a long time. I collected it for a long time. I still collect it and play the old school formats. Though I really like following the new sets in Flesh and Blood, and I don't follow the new sets in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think this is perfect timing to talk about similarities. Also because Sloopdoop, shout out to you Sloopdoop, releasing a video about hand traps and the similarities between hand traps and Yu-Gi-Oh! And instant cards and instant effects that are coming to Flesh and Blood and maybe coming more into Flesh and Blood in the future. So definitely want to talk about that topic too. And let's just start by talking about hand traps in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I think for those of you who are familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh! You know everything about hand traps, right? But just for the sake of the video, let's talk about hand traps for a second here. Also, if you want to know in depth about hand traps, I also recommend watching Sloopdoop's video about it. Mine will be not in detail like his about the hand traps, but also in other similarities with instant cards and the heroes in Flesh and Blood, comparing them to hand traps and spell speeds in Yu-Gi-Oh! So hand traps first occurred actually in the first set of Yu-Gi-Oh! And a card called Kuribu. I don't have it, but only by watching the TV series back then you might remember that card. That is even a hand trap. So a hand trap is basically a card that you can activate from your hand, and then it has an effect on the chain. And that is not possible with how Yu-Gi-Oh! Was designed at first with these two cards, with traps and then with spells that have a quick spell effect. These could only be activated from the field in your opponent's turn, but then hand traps could also be activated from your hand. That is where the term came from. And actually in 2008 there was a really popular hand trap released that changed Yu-Gi-Oh! Forever. It's called Gores, so all you old school players will definitely remember that card. And so this was, I think, the first, so to say, hand trap that was really in the meta, that everyone wanted to play and that you needed to prepare for. But then only until 2016, I think, really when hand traps started to go off. And I think that's very important to talk about here when we compare Flesh and Blood to Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Yu-Gi-Oh! When you are looking at it from a time frame, 2008, of course, then the game was still young. But in 2016, the game was around for quite a while. And then I think was really the point in time when hand traps became more popular, became more relevant in the meta, and then you can't really think about Yu-Gi-Oh! Without hand traps going forward from 2016. And we are only in the 5th year for Flesh and Blood, but now still instants are a thing. And I think even instants aren't a new thing, though we have these up and coming effects that come on the cards with an additional instant effect. I think really in Flesh and Blood instant cards and talking about hand traps, they were a thing from the beginning, because when we're actually looking at the heroes that we had from the beginning, the first 2 sets, most of them weren't really utilizing hand traps, so to say, or instant card effects. Maybe some of them were running Art of War. Art of War, I think, if you are talking about hand traps, you also need to talk about Art of War for a second. But at first I want to talk about the heroes. So when you're looking at the first 8 heroes, we see a hand trap back here actually. I think a Yu-Gi-Oh card sneaked in here because Kano, Drakai of Aether, I think really this can't be more similar to a hand trap when we're looking at Ghost Ogre, for example, here. Kano, Drakai of Aether is just a big hand trap for me. When looking at it, and I think also the feeling is kind of similar to the feeling when you are playing Yu-Gi-Oh and you are just getting busted by a couple of hand traps and then you can't really do anything anymore. And that is, I think, a very similar feeling when you're playing against Kano and you can't really do anything and he just blows you off in a few turns. So I think really, looking at the time frame here, Kano was one of the first heroes. He was around since Arcane Rising, and he was also very, very, very prevalent in the first Pro Tour. Some people even say he could have won the first Pro Tour. I mean, from history speaking, we know that he wasn't really winning the Pro Tour, but he was in the top 8, and he was a surprise factor. And I think, just talking about the comparison here, I think looking at Kano and looking at Instance and also looking at Wizards in general, they're kind of acting a little bit like hand traps, even though Kano doesn't really, like a hand trap. When, for example, looking at Ghost Ogre, you're interrupting the plays of your opponent and you are really making sure your opponent can't play a certain card. There are for sure worse hand traps than Ghost Ogre, like Maxi and other hand traps, but just talking about the feeling, playing against something with a hand trap effect, I think Kano is the perfect example here, because at some point you can't really do anything. Even though he doesn't really interrupt your plays by making sure you can't play your card out, he's making sure you can't play at all because you're dying. And also speaking of Wizards, all your Flesh and Blood guys will remember the hero called Icelander Stormbind. And I think when looking at Icelander, it even goes more prevalent. It is much more, the difference is just much more viewable, I think, because even though looking at a card like Blizzard, I don't have an Icelander here, guys, sorry. But looking at a card that you can play in Icelander, looking at Blizzard is just a hand trap for me, exactly what I think about Blizzard, because Blizzard is exactly what a hand trap should do. You can play it during your opponent's turn, you can play it out in response to a play that your opponent makes, and then you can just interrupt your opponent's play and make sure he can't really play his cards out in that turn. And that is exactly what Blizzard wants to do. You want to respond to an attack with Go Again that your opponent throws at you, and then you're playing Blizzard and say, okay, you know what, this attack will lose Go Again, and if you don't want that attack to lose Go Again, then you need to pay 2. And if you can't pay 2, or you don't want to pay 2, or maybe even if you pay 2, then your turn is over because you don't have any cards left, then that's exactly like what you want to do with a hand trap. So Icelander, coming to Icelander back here, Icelander could also play other blue ice cards on your opponent's turn, and then even not like Blizzard, which is an instant already, also play out cards that aren't instant, but as they were instants. So you could also play out a channel like Frigid on your opponent's turn, and then just say, okay, you know what, you don't really decide, like with Blizzard, if you want to pay the 2, I play out the Channel Lake, and then you just have to pay. And if you can't pay, then bad for you, right? We all love Channel Lake Frigid, and I think we all love that it's coming back in the meta. Okay, guys, so let's come to what we have at the moment in the meta, and that is Verdance. And I think the interesting part about that, also Sloopdope talked a lot about it in his video with the additional instance effect on the cards that are getting more relevant in the meta. So now we pretty much not only have instant cards like Blizzards that are instant by nature, or instant, or cards that can be played as instants in a deck like Icelander, but in not any other deck. But now you have cards that just anyone, or in particular here the Earth Heroes, can play with Fruits of the Forest and instant discard this and gain 2. So this doesn't really interrupt your opponent. That's right. Sloop I think evaluated this in his video a lot better than I will in this video with the additional instance effect. But they changed the Withered a little bit up here with Verdance, and I think that's very interesting. So definitely a very clever and special design space that the devs used here with Verdance, because Verdance doesn't really gain advantage on your opponent's turn, but rather on your turn. When you are gaining a life, then you're shooting 1 arcane damage. And so Fruits of the Forest doesn't really interrupt your opponent during his turn, even though this is an instant effect. You can just instant discard this on your turn. You shoot an arcane damage, and then you can basically go off afterwards. But so Wizards have changed. It's not anymore like, okay, every Wizard is just a hand trap. Every Wizard is just wanting to make sure you can't play the game at all. And then you die. But rather, Verdance is a Wizard that is a little bit on a different axis. So I really like that. So I don't really have that weird feeling of the Yu-Gi-Oh times where we knew that at some point we can't really let go of hand traps and we all need to play them, and if you don't play them, then you will just lose actually. So I don't really have the feeling that hand traps will be as prevalent in Flesh and Blood yet as it is in Yu-Gi-Oh! But coming back to the time frame, remember, we are just in the early days of Flesh and Blood still. Even though we are in the 5th year for Flesh and Blood, let's get to the 10th, to the 15th year, like we were with Ghost Ogre, with Maxi, and with Effect Veiler and cards like that, and then they became prevalent. And from 2016, 2017 on, Yu-Gi-Oh couldn't live without hand traps. Maybe even in the future, when Flesh and Blood is out for 10, 15, 16, 17 years, we will see maybe even cards like that. Maybe not hand traps, but maybe other cards. Maybe we don't know it yet, but I really hope for Flesh and Blood that it stays around as long as that, so we can actually talk about that then on the channel. But definitely I think Flesh and Blood is doing a lot of things right at the moment. I also, like I said, I still love Yu-Gi-Oh! I don't want to bash on it, but I think for me it's just super interesting to talk about this topic because I love these two games and I love to see similarities, just as Sloop also said in his video. That is something so unique, so special to me, that I'm flipping out every time I see something that is so similar to Flesh and Blood, like I felt in Yu-Gi-Oh! Even though maybe the cards are not the same, it got me a little bit, feeling like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Days, but it's different, right? Flesh and Blood is not Yu-Gi-Oh! Definitely not, but I love that it has some elements of it, and that sometimes me as a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player can feel a little bit of that Yu-Gi-Oh! Vibes in it. But let's just come back to this hand trap topic, because I showed you Art of War already, and this card is banned because it's just busted. And at some point, everybody was just so frustrated that it had to get taken off from the game, right? And I think this is also a really early card in Flesh and Blood. And so talking about Fruits of the Forest, for example, or Ripple Away, other cards that have this instant effect, of course, these are just coming now, but we have these hand trap sort of like cards from the beginning. And this is a card especially, what is in a generic, so everyone can play Art of War if you like to, and that is just something that Ghost Ogre also is, or another hand trap. They are mostly generics that you can just throw into every deck, and of course not everyone wants to play Art of War, but especially those decks that can utilize it, like you all know when you play the Zen meta, it's just busted. And so I think instant cards in general are just sorry guys, a little bit in the throat here. Instant cards in general are just a little bit more problematic to deal with when you don't really know when they will come off. It's not that yeah, Art of War will be played a lot of times on your turn, and so you're getting like, oh man, my my opponent is attacking me for 10 now on my turn, and I didn't expect that. But Art of War is definitely like an instant, because like a hand trap, because you can also throw it in when an attack goes off, right? And you don't want to block, and then it's just like, okay, you know what, I throw this Art of War in, and then I'm just getting additional value off. And also, I think, of course, there are some people out there that are really hating on hand traps, right? I can definitely get that from looking at modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And modern Yu-Gi-Oh! In general is, I think, pretty terrible. But we also had some times like that in Flesh and Blood already. Of course, I love Bravo Star of the Show, but some people really were hating the meta with Bravo Star of the Show, and also with the Zen. So I don't think it's fair to say that, yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is so bad, it's so nasty that they have all of these bad hand traps, and Flesh and Blood is doing everything better than Yu-Gi-Oh! No, actually, I don't think so. Of course, it's the better game for me at the moment, but yeah, there were some mistakes, so to say, made in Flesh and Blood 2, and I don't think that's bad at all. I think it's really good that the game can make mistakes, and that I can learn from it. And maybe it's even a fun time to look back at, and sometimes even take Bravo Star of the Show out and now play it in Living Legend. And I think Living Legend is something that we need to talk about in this video too, because even though some people really hate Kano, some people really love Kano. If you want to see some of those people, definitely check out my channel, because I have some videos with Peter, for example. And they rotate out. That's basically the thing. Like with Bravo Star of the Show. Of course, he was pretty nasty for a time being, but then he was just out because he rotated out with the Living Legend system, and so it will be with Kano. I think of the recording of this video, Kano is not out, right? So he's still in the meta, but he's also not a problem at all sometimes. Sometimes he's a really big problem, like we saw just after Rosetta was released. Some people were really heavy on Kano and were having a really good strategy on Kano, so they were just winning. But yeah, at some point Kano will be gone, and then that hand trap feeling that you have when playing Kano is gone too. I don't think that they will right off the bat have a hero like Kano again, just like we didn't really have a hero like Icelander right off the bat when Icelander left. But now we are getting Jarl, right? So we will see some of these ice cards again. Of course, you will not see a channel like Frigid on your turn with Jarl, but you will definitely have to fear yeah, getting Blizzard by your opponent on your turn when facing a Jarl. So yeah, basically that's, I think, everything I want to talk about for this video. I will definitely make more videos about Yu-Gi-Oh! And Flesh and Blood in the future. So if you enjoyed this video, definitely like it and subscribe to the Fabled Academy if you want to see more of those videos. But in the end here, I just want to, yeah, definitely fastly show you this deck of cards and just some comparison cards with Flesh and Blood and Yu-Gi-Oh! That I have on my collection, because I have a binder, I have some Flesh and Blood cards in my collection, I also have some Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, and I have some pages there where I have cards specifically that are really similar. And I love that cards. I just love flipping through those pages where I have these similar cards here, just like Call to the Grave, a very new card in Flesh and Blood that is just Foolish Burial, right? I also heard that, yeah, there is a similar card in Magic, but I think you will not hear me talk about Magic that often, because I don't have a clue about it. You will maybe see me talk with Magic players though, like with Simon Nielsen in the past. But yeah, just Call to the Grave, Foolish Burial, that is a very interesting card. We have Tome of Yendal. We have it on the ban list now. I think that's pretty interesting, because the tomes in general are just, yeah, basically a copy of the pots, right? But just better. I think that's so crazy about it. When I saw these cards in Flesh and Blood, I was like, isn't that broken drawing 2 cards? Didn't you remember Pot of Greed, guys? But then you're also gaining life of it. And then, no, it's not that bad, really. Trust me, people were saying in the beginning. But then, yeah, we have cards like Pot of Desires. And no, we all know cards like Tome of Yendal and stuff is not really that fair. Then we have a card actually from the first set, Welcome to Wraith, Snatch. That's such a great card, right? Such an iconic card for Flesh and Blood, and it's actually a card from Yu-Gi-Oh! It's not the same, don't get me wrong, but they are so similar, right? They even share a part of the name. The artwork is not the same, but also a little bit similar. And yeah, I just love looking at this. And then for the last, I just want to show these two, because we already talked about ice, but I just love that Flesh and Blood has, yeah, these elements. and these subtypes for their cards, just like Yu-Gi-Oh has also their types of cards here, like water, and it really reminds me of Yu-Gi-Oh. And I think that is something that I really love about Flesh and Blood that much, because in Yu-Gi-Oh you sometimes have to run like these beautiful dragon themes cards, and then just throw in this nasty badly looking Ghost Ogre just because you need to play it. Of course we have cards like CNC in Flesh and Blood 2. But I just love this similarity here too. Definitely let me know in the comments what you think about Flesh and Blood and Yu-Gi-Oh! Are you an experienced Yu-Gi-Oh! Player that now plays Flesh and Blood? Are you a Flesh and Blood player that now plays Yu-Gi-Oh! Are you an old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Player? What kind of cards do you love? And maybe you have some similar cards too that I didn't show in the video yet, and that you want to let the world know that is a similarity between Yu-Gi-Oh! And Flesh and Blood. So guys, thank you so much for getting into this video with me, and we see us in the next video.